Hi, I'm Dr. Dave Clayton, and today I'm going to give you my #1 pick for how to lower your cholesterol naturally without taking medication. This one supplement is as powerful as most prescription medications, and I'm going to give you the data behind it, why it's so effective, some of the history, the dangers to look out for, and how you can avoid those pitfalls and lower your cholesterol safely and naturally using just one supplement. So if you want to lower your cholesterol naturally, this video is for you. And of course, if you like what you see, please like and subscribe. So let's get started with why you should care about lowering your cholesterol. Well, let's start with the fact that about 50% of adults have high cholesterol. And in fact, one of the things that I noticed when I started practicing was that most of my patients not only needed cholesterol medication, but they didn't want cholesterol medication. And when, of course, this happened to me and my cholesterol went up, I felt the same way. I definitely did not want to take a statin. So I was willing to do whatever it took to avoid it. And I'm going to show you what that is. Now, I would think that diet and exercise could really make a difference because diet and exercise can be pretty powerful for moving a lot of the other health metrics, but unfortunately for LDL cholesterol, it really doesn't do the trick in most cases. So, your average person can expect to lower their cholesterol by up to about 10% with just diet and exercise. And if you want to go extreme, the data supports a 20% reduction. But for most people, that's really not going to cut it. If your cholesterol's 150, 160, 170, and you got to get it down to 100, this really isn't going to do the trick. And I think that's why most people end up on statins, because supplements are really hard to navigate and diet and exercise isn't that effective. So it's kind of easy to throw in the towel and take a statin. And about 200 million people each year are prescribed statins for this reason. So if you stick with me, I'm going to show you how you can not be one of those 200 million people and how you can do this safely and effectively with supplementation. So with that starting place, let's dive right into what is the supplement that I want you to really focus on today. And that's red yeast rice. Red yeast rice is a phenomenal supplement for a number of reasons. And if you can get smart on it in the next few minutes, it may change your life and your approach to dealing with high cholesterol. So let's start with what is red yeast rice. Red yeast rice is a fermented rice that has been used from the days of the Ming Dynasty. 2,000 years ago, 300 BC, the Chinese were fermenting plain old rice with a strain of yeast called Monascus purpureus. And if you let it sit under the right conditions, it turns into this beautiful red purplish dried out rice that can be then ground into a powder and turned into a supplement. So the Ming Dynasty days, and even for the past 2,000 years, it's been used as a food coloring for things like Peking duck or some red vinegars. And it was also thought to have medicinal purposes, that it would improve your qi or your heart health. And it wasn't until the 1970s, nearly 2,000 years after it was first kind of introduced, that researchers isolated certain components in there that actually do lower the cholesterol. And the most important one of those is what's called monocolin K. And monocolin K was the most powerful, not the only, but the most powerful lipid lowering component of red yeast rice, and that was patented, and it became lovastatin or Mevacor, the first statin back in the 1970s. And of course that spawned the entire pharmaceutical genre of statin medications that are prescribed so heavily today. Now, red yeast rice contains a lot more than just lovastatin. There's at least 3 other monocolins plus a lot of other phytochemicals and sterols in there that all collectively lower cholesterol pretty significantly. And what we'll see as we look at the data is that the amount of cholesterol lowering that you get from red yeast rice is actually equivalent to what you'd get from a much higher dose of a statin if you were going to take that purified component. So let's take a minute and go look at that data for ourselves. So let's take a look at this meta-analysis, which is a great overview of how powerful red yeast rice can be in lowering cholesterol. And now there's tons of research out there, but this one particular trial is great because it encompasses over 20 individual trials, over 6,000 patients, and it shows you that in aggregate, you get about a 40-point reduction in your LDL cholesterol, and that's 1 millimole per liter for our viewers outside the United States. But 40 points is a lot. If your cholesterol is 140, this means with one supplement, you can drop it down to 100. So you go from the unsafe range where your doctor is nagging at you back to the safe range where you're in the lower risk categories just by taking the one supplement. And you'll see that that's about equivalent to what you'd get from a low potency or a low dose statin, which makes this a really viable alternative to taking medications if that's what you're into, okay? Now remember, what this video is all about education and entertainment. If you're gonna make any changes, go talk to your doctor first. But let's look now at some really big comparison trials to see what a large trial of red yeast rice looks like stacked up against a large trial of a statin. So here we've got two trials, the China Coronary Secondary Prevention Study and the 4S trial. Now the 4S trial measured simvastatin in patients that had pre-existing heart disease. And the China Coronary Prevention Study was looking at red yeast rice in the same demographic. And lo and behold, they both looked at roughly similar numbers of patients, right about 4,000 patients. And what you see is if you stack it up in terms of LDL cholesterol lowering, coronary events, cardiac death, or overall mortality, the numbers line up really nicely. Now, only in China can you do a really large trial of an herbal supplement for a population of patients with known heart disease because they take this stuff very seriously. And in the US, I know we rely a lot more on our pharmaceutical drugs for these kinds of trials, but if you look at two well-designed trials, each including over 4,000 patients with heart disease, the statistics line up really nicely. So the evidence really does support that for a lot of people, this is a viable alternative. Of course, talk to your doctor before you make any changes. But now let's look at some of the reasons why red yeast rice may not be as popular in the United States as it could be otherwise. Number one, let's look at safety. Okay, now safety is an issue, and across clinical trials, and what I'm looking at here is the same trial that we looked at before, the 20 trials, the 6,000 patients, the meta-analysis that we looked at earlier, safety really wasn't an issue. There was no significant difference in liver and kidney problems. The liver enzymes, actually the levels decreased in the patients who took the red yeast rice. That's pretty significant. And some of the common complaints that we see with statins are the muscle aches and pains, the cramps, and the really severe muscle breakdown we call rhabdomyolysis, where the muscle actually isn't just cramping, it's actually breaking down, and you get noticeable amounts of muscle enzymes in the blood, and they can cause kidney problems. But we didn't see that at all in the supplementation. And in fact, David Becker at Temple University has done some research on red yeast rice in patients who had to stop statins for the muscle ache. So these are patients who said, I can't take the cholesterol medication, it's giving me too many side effects, give me something else. So he looked at 62 patients who had failed statins for muscle aches, and he put them on red yeast rice, and he saw very significant reductions in cholesterol at weeks 12, at weeks 24, without a measurable increase in the muscle aches and the cramps. So while it's certainly possible that you might get muscle symptoms, the statistics show that it's pretty well tolerated, especially, well, even if you have had problems with the statins. All right, so let's look at a couple of things that we want to look out for when we start taking red yeast rice. So there's three things that we really need to be cognizant of when we look at red yeast rice. Number one is this stuff actually might work too well. So in the United States, you're not allowed to sell a nutritional supplement that has a drug in it. That's kind of looked at as cheating, right? So the pharmaceutical companies get to sell the drugs. If you're a nutraceutical company, if you're selling a supplement, you don't get to sell a drug. And as we learned earlier, when you ferment this rice, one of the things you get is lovastatin. This is where it comes from. It's part of the process. If you do it right, you should get lovastatin. And in fact, when you find red yeast rice manufacturers that do their job well and they get this right, you can get into trouble. And we see here the FDA has come down on HPF cholesterol because, oh my goodness, it has lovastatin in it. And luckily it hasn't been taken off the market. You can still get this. I found it at Vitacost the other day. But, it's hard to navigate this because any company that gets this right may run into problems with the FDA, okay? I don't write the rules. The other problem that you can get here is toxins in the fermentation process. So one of the components that may come out of improper fermentation of the rice is a compound called citrinin, and that can cause real problems with your liver, your kidneys, your gastrointestinal tract. And there's some data showing that certain manufacturers of nutraceuticals have pretty high levels of citrinin. And if you look at the data, what you'll find is that there are very rare case reports of patients that have liver or kidney problems because of taking red yeast rice. Now, I found a couple of case reports in my research. Here's one. Here's another, and as you can see, if I try to get more than a couple, I end up having to look at international case studies. This one's in Danish, and here's the original Danish version of it, which I can't read, but maybe some of our viewers can. So it is a real thing. However, it is not something that statistically you really need to be worried about too much because you're talking about relatively rare incidents, comparative to the number of people who take red yeast rice. And that begs the question that we really need to get to the heart of, which is, what brand should we be looking at? Because making red yeast rice is not like just churning out, large quantities of vitamin K or vitamin D that can be isolated in a lab. This is a fermentation process much more akin to making a recipe. So, as anybody who's been in the kitchen can tell you, it doesn't take much to screw up a recipe. And what we're looking for here are people who know how to make this and have standardized their process and can make it well. Now, Consumer Labs does an analysis where they pull all these bottles off the shelves and they check to see how much lovastatin is in here and how much citrinin is in here. And as you can see here, I took the names of the brands away, but at a glance, what you see is these red bars are the amount of active ingredient that we want, and the green bars are the toxic byproduct, the citrinin. And when we look at this, what we see is that not only is there a lot of variation, but unfortunately, the brands where we have the least amount of active ingredient are the ones where we have the most amount of toxin, which is not good because I could imagine a scenario where you say, gosh, this isn't working for my cholesterol, let me go take more of it. And guess what? You're having more and more of the citrinin and you're causing more and more likely risk of having kidney or liver problems, which we don't want. So what we want to do is we want to find somebody who's got that process standardized, who knows their way around their kitchen and can give you that Michelin 5-star recipe that we're looking for so that every month when we're taking our supplement, we're getting exactly the amount of cholesterol lowering that we think we are while keeping our liver and kidneys safe. And there's a lot of variability even among the manufacturers, in as much as some brands will do well one year on their testing with Consumer Labs and then they'll fail the next year. Some brands have got really high levels of citrinin, up to 65 times the acceptable limits. That is crazy, especially when we think about those being the brands where we might be doubling down because our cholesterol is not going down the way we want it to. And you can't trust the labeling. When we look at the label, what we see is that some of the brands that actually write citrinin free right on the label, those are the ones that flag the worst on Consumer Labs. So it really makes this touchy, and I find that when I'm dealing with my patients and giving them advice, I have to be very specific about what brands I want them to buy. And that's how I'm going to close this video, is telling you the 2 brands that I think you should be thinking about when you go shopping for red yeast rice. And I will tell you straight up, I don't have any financial interest in either of these companies. I'm just giving you the same advice that I would give a family member or a patient. So let's look at what are those companies, what are the brands we should be looking at, what doses should we be taking, and then I'll give you some links in the description so that you can go out and shop for these yourselves. So the 2 brands I would recommend are HPF Cholesterol, which is the top scoring brand in Consumer Labs analysis. And this is the one you'll recall that got flagged by the FDA because it had too much active ingredient, right? Like, you know, that's great, you know, bring it on, right? So the HPF Cholesterol, I'll drop a link in there. Like I said, I found it on Vitacost, so you can definitely get it online even today at the time of this video. And the other brand is from Sylvan Wellness. It's called Heart Shape, and this is one that I've been using personally for about the past 10 years. They're a US-based manufacturer, and it's an organic product, and I can tell you from experience that it's been keeping my cholesterol in check and my patient's cholesterol in check for the last 5 to 10 years. So it's one that I trust, even though it's not one that is part of the Consumer Labs analysis, but I can give you some anecdotal evidence that it's one of my favorites. The cost is really not too bad. So most of these, depending on how you dose it, should cost you somewhere between $12 and $20 a month. The dosing is kind of variable. So 1,200 milligrams per day is what's generally recommended to be a starting dose. I take 2,400 milligrams because I want to get that maximum lowering. And in David Becker's trials of statin intolerant patients, he even went up to 3,600 milligrams of red yeast rice daily. So each tablet of, or capsule, sorry, of red yeast rice generally has about 600 milligrams. So you're talking about 2 capsules, 4 capsules, 6 capsules at most. And if you take them at night, you get a little extra benefit because the way red yeast works in general is by inhibiting the liver's production of cholesterol, and that gets ramped up slightly at bedtime. So I hope this video was helpful. I've given you some education on why you should be thinking about red yeast rice, which brands you should take, and what are some of the considerations to help keep you safe and help you find that effective supplementation. Now, don't make any changes without talking to your doctor first. And if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.